Welcome back everyone to Genshin Interact. Today we'll be discussing the upcoming characters and weapons on the first half of the 3.6 banners, and whether or not you should spend those hard-earned Primo Gems.
If you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in.
Now, onto the video. So the first character we're going to be looking at is Nilou. We're going to be looking at Nilou and Nahida for both characters, but let's kind of look into a little bit of a niche character, Nilou. What are some team function ideas and playstyle things that you're thinking about, Rift?
Well, we do know that she is pretty niche in her playstyle and abilities. We know she's really good for a Bloom team, but Nilou ascends into that HP percent really heavily. It's why her weapon is also HP. Again, we'll talk about that later. But what, Vixen, do you see about her playstyle more specifically?
I think it's really kind of, once again, niche. I love her entire playstyle, that it's off-field, obviously being a support, but those Bloom damage numbers, she acts like a DPS in and of itself. She can just play by herself no matter what.
Yeah, it's insane from what I've seen.
Exactly, and seeing that her skill and her burst help her in so many different ways, with her skill putting her in a special state that has different effects, and her burst kind of dealing like a huge AoE Hydro damage burst hit, as well as, you know, affecting enemies with an effect. I think all of the things that she kind of puts together, even though she may not be necessarily a goated Hydro DPS in general, just to play over and over and over again over different teams, she very much fits this niche of Bloom.
You were mentioning her burst, doing that AoE like Hydro damage and applying effect. That actually kind of reminds me of how Child's burst works, where he does one big hit and then he actually applies Riptide. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's the whole point, is that when he hits crits off of those, he's going to be doing even bigger damage. So it's kind of a very similar thing that we're kind of seeing maybe with different characters throwing these effects on. We're getting more and more characters that throw effects on enemies and throwing effects on themselves, and we're kind of seeing a lot more of that, and I'm really excited to see what Hoyoverse has in the future for other characters.
Yeah, but for sure.
Some other characters that maybe Nilou could be like, I mean, I think there's only one, Hayato, just because of his burst, being able to create those Bloom cores, as well as obviously him and his skill with those fast hitting slashes, if you have a Nahida already creating the constant Bloom with you. I think besides that, there's not too many other characters. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the team functions similar between how you would play them. If you're playing Hayato in a Bloom team, Nahida, just getting that Bloom off, it's going to have a similar effect as to where you're playing Nilou with Nahida, except when you play Nilou with Nahida, you're going to turn those Bloom cores into Bountiful cores, and they're just going to deal a lot more damage than Hayato would. So the team style is similar. Nilou's damage is going to be higher. Hayato is going to be a better on-field DPS than Nilou can be, but Nilou can put, again, out those crazy Bloom numbers. And I actually have seen some on-field Nilou gameplay. If you do want to go that route, I've definitely seen that before. But again, it's just probably not the recommended way to go. It's kind of like, you know, there's a specific way to build Raiden, right? You want to build her on 4-piece emblem, go high energy recharge. But I have seen people do like 4-piece Flower Paradise Lost and go full EM build on Raiden just for Hyper Bloom. I just don't think it's worth it when you do that, because then you're just missing out on her intended use, where you could actually just use someone like Kuki to do the same thing.
I think the biggest thing that comes to it is that when you're looking at the characters, as much as it is fun to look at other ways to build that character and throw them in different teams, you need to kind of focus on, you know, maximizing their kit as much as possible if that's what you're trying to do with the team. If you're just trying to have fun, then obviously just throw 4 characters together and just see what happens. But if you're really trying to look to maximize, in this specific case, Nilou, she will be working best in that Bloom team. So next we're going to be looking at Nahida, the Dendro Archon, getting her first rerun at the latter half of the Sumeru arc of Genshin. And we're kind of looking at the supportive character and capabilities that she has, but also, you know, sometimes a little bit of that DPS ability that she has off field.
Yeah.
And descending into Elemental Mastery, being able to just create higher reaction numbers, helping the team even more. But what do you think about her actual, like, skill, burst, how it's going to help the team, help herself?
Right. Well, her skill, again, is really good for Dendro application. It's the best way to apply Dendro, especially on single targets. The only problem you'll ever encounter with Nahida's skill is if you're killing a lot of waves of enemies too fast and repeatedly. So then it's like spawning new enemies. You have to remark the enemies with Nahida. That's the only scenario where it's like not that good. But it's got the best uptime for Dendro application on a lot of single targets or just heavy hitters and higher HP targets, especially good for the Abyss scenario. Again, ascending into EM, she's gonna, when she places her burst, when you use her burst, she's going to give all the party members EM based on whoever has the highest amount of elemental mastery in the party. So say you're Nahida, you're running her on a 400 or 500 EM build, and your other 3 units in your team have lower elemental mastery than Nahida. Well, when you use Nahida's burst in this case, it's going to grab from Nahida's EM since she has the highest amount of that 400 to 500 range that you have, and give a 25% elemental mastery from 400 to 500. Now, if you have someone else in there with high EM, like a Kazuha in there, if you're doing some kind of like aggravate team where you can use Kazuha with Nahida and it's actually viable, or you just have other high EM characters like Kuki on a Hyper Bloom build, Virgin Toma, etc., then it's actually, if they have higher EM than Nahida, it's actually going to grab from their EM. And so that's a little bit of like how her burst does work. It's just really good for granting EM to everyone in the party. So this is good for anyone who likes EM and their damage. So characters like Alhaitham, Tainari, any characters who are wanting to do melt or vaporize damage. And then also one thing about her burst that she also will be doing, this is the selfish part of her burst, is based on the elements in your party, like Pyro, Hydro, and Electro. She's actually going to give herself a damage bonus if you have Pyro units in the team. If you have Hydro units in the team, it's going to increase the duration of her burst to be longer. And then Electro units on your team is going to make her skill interval decrease. What that means is when you mark opponents with her skill and you have an Electro character on the team and you pop Nahida's burst, the skill will damage faster over time.
Now if we're going to be looking at the Dendro Archon herself, what are some characters that are going to be very similar to her is what we're going to look at next. And the first person to think of is the free character that we get, which is Kale. Now Kale is great and free, which is the best part, but her Dendro application is not as good as Nahida's. You know, she's a little bit also selfish with her skills and her passive talents. She tries to do a lot of damage by herself while putting out a good amount of Dendro application with her burst and even her skill if you run a sacrificial, constantly getting her skill back. These things are great, but at the end of the day, even Kale's damage, even though she's based off of attack percent, she likes to buff kind of her own attack to then do more damage. Her damage isn't even going to be as big as Nahida's in the long run either. So obviously the Dendro Archon wins out in this contest between the two. And then one of the newer characters that we've gotten from the Dendro element is Yao Yao. Yao Yao's got really good Dendro application actually. She heals as well. Her burst heals the entire party. A lot of these things she's a great Dendro healer at the end of the day. But once again, her Dendro application is not as good as Nahida's. You can't really get beyond that fact of Nahida's hold skill. It's just absolutely amazing to just hold Dendro onto enemies that you look at. And that's just the biggest thing that she can do.
Yeah, it's kind of like no one really rivals Raiden's skill. And the reason I compare Nahida's skill with Raiden's skill is because they both have a 25-second duration. There's nothing even close, nothing in the game right now that's even close to that duration. It's so long.
Personally, I don't necessarily think that every person needs Nahida. There's a lot of characters that I think that are going to be great for accounts. I don't think necessarily that she is going to be one of them, although I do put her as an S tier support. We get Dendro Traveler. Both the twins have really good Dendro application with their burst, very similar to Kale's. Very good Dendro application. Also, if you already have Yao Yao and you pulled for Alhaitham, it's great to have Alhaitham with Nahida, but I really don't think that the primos are necessarily worth it if you have Yao Yao as well. A good healer, especially for a DPS. It's just going to be between Yao Yao and Nahida. It's a good heal versus an EM buff. So that's going to be kind of the idea that you're going to have to think about. We can't necessarily make the choice for you of whether or not to get the character. And we do say that she's going to be a great character and she'll never be a negative to your team. But there are things that you could look at for other characters as well that you may or may not have. Besides the two characters that have their own banners, we're going to be looking at the weapon banner and the weapons for said characters and their signatures. So first is Nilou. We're going to go back to the Key of Kajni suit. We saw this weapon a while ago and it's resurfaced once again. Looking at the main stat of HP percent, as we said earlier, pretty high at 66.2%. Kind of crazy. High. And a base attack of 542, but honestly, obviously that does not matter on her. Rift, what do you think is going to be helping Nilou specifically? And then are there other characters that this could even help?
Well, obviously this is Nilou's preferred weapon with such a high main stat of HP. And there's actually, at this current time, I don't think there's another HP percent sword in the game. And considering that Nilou actually likes this HP scaling, this is obviously going to be her go-to over anything. And it's so good for her just because of that HP main stat that you can't get from any other sword. While it's giving her all this additional HP, It's also going to be giving an EM increase based off of the HP percent, which is even more cracked for Nilou especially. It's just all makes sense for her. It's really only useful for Nilou, but some other characters you could try it out on if you ended up getting it early, or, you know, you got it by accident, let's say. You could actually put this on Layla if you have her. Layla's a sword user who does scale on HP percent for her shielding capability. But there are usually better options for Layla, like just using a Favonius sword, because she is still a support, and you can still get Layla's HP over 30,000 without using this 5-star Key of Kajni suit, and she's still a valuable character without that. But it is just an option. You could also throw it on Bennett if you want like maximum healing Bennett. I wouldn't recommend doing that though. You probably just want to use, like, if you do have it, Aquila Favonia or Mist Splitter, if you did get that on the Ayaka banner, just for the high base attack that those have to offer. But moving on to the next weapon, 1,000 Floating Dreams. This is Nahida's weapon. Vixen, what can you tell us about that one?
It's got a main stat of Elemental Mastery, once again even helping her even more than what she ascends into, giving a 265 Elemental Mastery increase, which is once again even better, which helps her as well. Make sure that she's going to be the EM kind of giver of the team, with the same base attack as 542. The only really good character that it's for is going to be Nahida. Has the EM or damage bonus buff to other party members, obviously helping out the entire team. Once again, helping Nahida fill that role of that support.
Like Vixen said, just there's really no point in trying to specifically target going after this weapon unless you already pulled Nahida. Now, if you did happen to get it on accident because you're going after Kiev Kajni suit, some characters I can think of that it can technically work, but not recommended, is I can think of Hazo just for the EM and higher base attack, just because it's a 5-star. And gives EM and damage, right? Everyone likes that. And Hazo actually does have a lot of off-field damage supports, namely Xingqiu, Xiangling. Though that EM and damage bonus will buff them pretty considerably. So that's something to think about. Also, like, Yanfei does like EM a lot because you usually use her in a Vaporizer Melt build. Also, one more that I think is kind of important that people don't think about is actually using it on Lisa, specifically if you have Lisa built as like a Dendro support. If you do accidentally get it, it's not completely worthless for you, especially because Lisa is free, and Xiangling, Xingqiu, usually characters a lot of people have. Xiangling's also free, so if you do have a Hazo, that's something to think about. But moving on, we're going to get to the summary of our pulling options on these characters and weapons. And so, Vixen, what are some questions that we usually go over?
Well, the first question is, we always look at, do you need a support, sub-DPS character? You know, do you need these characters that are on the banners on your account? Nilou is going to be very specific to one team, as we said over and over again. Sure, you could try a Vaporized team, you can try these certain things out with her, and she might do okay, but at the end of the day, taking full advantage of her entire kit, you're going to get the most usefulness out of her from a Bloom team. You're going to be using Nilou usually with another Hydro. Nahida and another Dendro is probably your best bet. Having that 2 Hydro, 2 Dendro, getting the resonances, and Nahida is going to help Nilou constantly bloom. Once again, these pair together are going to be an amazing thing. We haven't talked about that yet, but these two characters being on the same banner is another great thing. You know, the last banner we had was Shenhe and Ayaka, which was another crack duo.
Yeah.
So never mind looking at the past banner, this banner is also crazy good itself. The problem is that the last banner was a lot more suitable to multiple different teams. You could get both characters for a lot of different reasons and utilities, whereas Nilou is going to be very one team heavy. Nahida, on the other hand, is going to be your best Dendro support you could get. Obviously, being the Dendro Archon, she's going to be doing a lot of damage, as well as helping your team out by giving them a buff, giving herself a buff. All of these things, Nahida's a great pulling option at the end of the day. Besides looking at if you actually need a character on your account, Rift, what's the next question we go to?
Well, the second question we always ask our viewers is, what elements is your account in need of? And in this particular case, do you want a niche Bloom team with Nilou, or do you need more Dendro just in general on your account when we're talking about Nahida here? And then Nahida is going to be the best Dendro player in the game. She's definitely worth the pull if you are lacking Dendro and you have the Primos. So the next question we look at is, do you have the resources to properly invest into the characters you pull? And so, Vixen, what is your answer to that?
I think both the characters being in Sumeru and needing Sumeru materials, the big question is, are you there yet? Are you close? Are you there at Sumeru? That's just, I think, the biggest question for you. It's going to be very difficult, especially with these characters needing specific flowers and things that are only going to be in Sumeru. that's going to take a lot more time and effort than you might think. So I think that's the biggest part to maybe think about before you are deciding over this character as well. If you're thinking, well, I don't want to lose Nahida, you guys have said that she's a great Dendro support, then sure, you can go ahead and pull, and that's perfectly fine. Obviously, just know that you're not going to be having her at level 80 or whatever, because you're going to need those Ascension materials. After you've realized that you may have the materials that you need, the next question is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? Nilou only fits into one team, and that's just something we can't repeat enough. It's great that you can do these other teams, but this is going to be specific for you. Nahida can fit into any Dendro-specific team, or even just her burst is nice for extra elemental mastery in any team possible.
So looking at your account, what roles do you have filled or not filled? And this is a very important question because this is going to determine just how good pulling a certain character is or is not for you. So weighing the dangers here, all the way from free-to-play players and even new players, all the way to veteran players and whales. So we think that free-to-play players should always invest into multifunctional characters like Nahida on this banner, but Nilou can put you in a bind by forcing your account into one team.
Besides free-to-play players, veteran free-to-play players and other veteran players might already have a decent lineup by now and can safely consider niche characters like Nilou. Now, if we're looking at high spenders, the constellations are going to be a big part of what you're going to look at. Even though high spenders are going to be looking at, oh, they just get C6s all the time. Well, it's actually nice to not have to go all the way to a C6 to get the character to be the best possible. And so some people are looking at, even though they are a high spender, what constellations are even good, because a lot of people don't talk about that. So Rift, what can you tell us about the constellations of each character and what they can kind of helpfully do, and what's going to be their best ones to help the high spenders?
Well, as a general rule, most good constellations, other than the C6 of course, are going to be the C1 and C2 for a majority of characters in the game. Nahida's C2 is probably her best, and her other constellations might not be fully worth all the primos to get them. Getting Nilou to C2 gives probably her two best constellations and lets her relish in the title of the Bloom Queen even more. We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.